This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. This is a part of a discussion I recently had on the meaning of the holidays, family, friendship, and community with several of our listeners. As we head toward the end of the year, I thought it would be nice to celebrate our 50th episode with a group of listeners I've met over the course of the past year. The group of listeners are people that I often receive feedback from, consult on their ideas, and simply listen to their stories. Their lives often give me inspiration for the guests I bring on to the show. Since we started in February, the show's evolved in terms of the topics. Many I never would have foreseen addressing, guests I would have never imagined having on, and a group of listeners I never would have imagined. I appreciate my listeners for listening each week to our guests, but one thing I've learned this year is that they are very much a part of the podcast, as much as my guests or me. You'll often hear me referring to we when I talk about the podcast. They, our listeners, are the we I'm talking about. People often ask me, what's the key to interviewing others? And I tell them it's not about coming up with great questions. Research plays a role in preparing for interviews, but while important, it's not that either. What really is important is that you don't stick to any script, that you simply listen to what the person in front of you says in the moment and respond with your authentic thoughts, feelings, and questions. So today we have Carly Fulham, a listener from Arizona who I often find comfort in her kind words and remarks and good advice. Kathy Bilbin, a screenwriter and teacher from Washington State, who came to us through our mutual connection to two guests, Gloria Crow Boberitz and Brandon Trand. Elizabeth McMaster, a listener from Virginia, an attorney who joined us for an episode in November where we discussed an area of law meant to protect the elderly and disabled from dangers in the world. Jennifer Cunningham, a listener from England who is also a connoisseur of joy and takes a realistic approach to finding and bringing happiness into the world. Bob Rowe, a listener and paramedic from Atlanta. He's brought a great comfort in a year where my mom died. And Sophie Tibbetts, a thoughtful listener from the Fond du Lac Reservation in Minnesota, who I'm convinced has no idea how wise she is. But last but not least, three-time guest Jason Ursay joins us. Jason has been on to talk about writing, fiction, and his podcast, Santa May Be a Criminal. Santa May Be a Criminal, it's a true crime podcast that's really about hope and healing with a side sort of journey through the question of whether Santa is actually a criminal. It's a wonderful group of people, a wonderful group of human beings. And I'm so grateful not only to have them as listeners, but in my life. For a lot of podcasts, you develop what we call parasocial relationships. That's where most of the energy in a relationship really comes from the listeners, and it's very one sided. But these are true friendships with depth and meaning. And I have such gratitude for this podcast that's put us all on a collision course. Today, we're going to discuss the meaning of the holidays, family, and community. I picked this topic because it's something I've learned from two of my guests, Brett Talley and Alice LaCour of the Prosecutors Podcast. They pointed out in their episodes with us that what primarily drives them to continue their podcast is not their interest in law or true crime, which both run deep, but the community that they've built at a time when so many of our traditional communities, as Brett said, are broken, and at a time where we need community the most. So with that, let's do this. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to thank you guys for joining me today. This is our 50th episode, not including the bonus episodes. And, it's funny. A year ago, when I started thinking about the podcast, I would have never imagined such a broad group of listeners finding such, I guess, interesting and caring people. But what I really would not have imagined is becoming friends with all of you guys. Um, we've got listeners all over the country. Virginia is our top state, which makes sense because that's where I live. But, next is Washington State, where Kathy's from. California, Texas, Georgia, where Bob and Jason are from, and Ohio. And then our largest international audience, the United States, but then followed by England, Australia, Belgium, and then, if you can believe this, guys, Romania. So, the reason why I say that is like it's really cool. I thought this would be a very like laid back podcast where there'd be like 13 listeners and they'd all be my family or colleagues. But it's really awesome to me that some of the messages that my guests have brought have reached so many people in such a large area. And one of the most, I was telling you guys off mic that one of the most important things I think to me has been that we have built a really broad, diverse, and supportive community, not just like on the Silver Linings Fireside Chat on Facebook or even the new Patreon page that we just started, but a community in the sense, like in the true sense of a community which is really about relationships. And I'm really grateful for the relationships that I have with all of you guys. So I just wanted to thank you. And I wanted to just start by asking some of you guys how you found the podcast. And I'm going to start with Carly because Carly is, my joy, the joy factory for me. So I'm curious, how did you find the podcast? Oh, wow. And then you didn't say, I never want to hear this dude's voice again. Oh, that's awesome. And grateful for you. Like, that means I lucked out. Another thing to thank Brett and Alice for. So, how about you, Jen? How did you find us? Ah, yeah. That's awesome. I remember, Carly, I don't know if I ever told you about this, but like you had posted this, post to someone else where you were telling somebody to go back to the first episode, and I was like, what was in the first episode? And I went back. It's not that I didn't remember it, but that was so meaningful, and I think realized over time it was like just setting the tone of candor with people and making it a safe space for guests to just be honest about who they are. And I've had a couple guests over time, like I'll say like, wow, I didn't expect this to be like this. I thought it was going to be a more traditional interview. And I guess I didn't realize that it brought something different to people. So since you mentioned Jason. Let's ask Jason slash Richie Buck slash head elf of Santa Maybe a Criminal podcast, which is a great one. If any of my listeners are not listening to it, I just want to ask you what's wrong with you. So feel free to message me with the answers. So Jason.
You couldn't hear me. I'm sorry. I screwed that up. I turned my
It's all
mic off.
good, my
Sorry.
man.
I was trying to be not, um, uh, make an issue. But so the question is how I found out about you. Is that the
Mm-hmm.
question? Yeah. So it was definitely the prosecutors, and I started kind of listen to you a little bit, and then I reached out to you, and I just think like what you said, like you provide a space that people can be candid, and that it feels so like your shirt says conversations that inspire, right? And that's the thing, like it's not an interview, it's a conversation, and that meant a lot to me because I did feel like your curiosity led you to like the conversations you were having, and so I reached out to you and said, hey, I want to get to know you, and you were like, yes, let's get to know each other, and then like 3 hours later, like we're like, okay, let's do a show together, and then like you're like we'll do a show sometime in the future, and then like 3 days later you're like, my guest dropped out, can we do a show this week? And I was like, sure, why not? I can stay up until all hours in the morning because that's what I do anyway. So and then we had another amazing chat then, and we've had so many amazing chats, and both on mic and off mic, that are very, very meaningful to me. And I count you as one of the greatest people I've ever met and ever known. And I really appreciate what you offer, that you just give people an opportunity for their voices and their words to matter. And that's sort of the thing that I lean on, is that words and stories matter. And
Mm-hmm.
you give a platform for that. So
I think you do the same thing. I haven't said it on this podcast yet, but Jason and I are going to be doing a podcast in the new year, probably around the second quarter or the end of the first quarter of the year. But I think it really comes from our shared desire to be able to tell more of the good, to give people more inspiration in life. And, true crime space sort of seems like a weird space for us to do it in. But if you think about how many of the people who are on this call who come from the true crime space, and we found like what your podcast does, like a lot of joy and love and happiness and advice, and I think probably a lot less anxiety and sadness because of those connections.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that really gets me jazzed up about it is that most of the things that happen in the true crime space are the most horrific, awful, most terrible things that anybody could possibly experience. But a number of those people turn the worst experience of their lives into a counterpoint, bringing joy and hope and support for other people that may experience those things. And I think that is something that's really worthy of being talked about. It's incredible that people can rebound from those horrific things that happen to them, the worst things in the world, and have the strength to actually not only just exist after, but to actually go on and do good things. And I think that fits with both of our brands and who we are as people. And so I'm really excited about sharing those stories, because I think it's really important to know that, like, it doesn't have to be the end. Like this, it's awful, and you will always grieve, and you always have a hole in your heart, but you can also continue on and help others. And so that's really, really cool and important to me. And I'm so glad that you made the suggestion, not me. Like, I'm so glad that you offered that up, because it fits right in what I want to be a part of. So I appreciate you, man.
And for the record, I actually think you made the suggestion first. Like at the end of our first
you made
episode.
it. You made it.
So how about you, Kathy? How did you find this crazy land?
Well, I found you through the podcast that I'm researching and writing for, which is called Snake River Killer, hosted by Brandon Schrand. And one of the other people on that podcast was interviewed on your show, Gloria Boberts, and I think that's how we got connected.
Gloria's
I ended up writing to you.
Gloria's amazing. But go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I just ended up messaging you and asking you. I knew that you had made a visit out west to meet with Brandon and Gloria and to visit the sites in the podcast, and we just started talking.
Yeah. It's for those of you who don't know, Gloria is the one who came on and talked about her cousin Christina Nelson, who had been murdered by a suspected serial killer in Idaho and Washington. And if you don't know the Snake River Killer podcast, Brandon was also on recently. But one of the things that is kind of amazing about what Brandon's done is just sort of like we bring together our listeners. He's brought together many of his listeners, like Kathy, to bring their expertise and research, linguistics, criminology, and now it's become not just a community.
Did we lose Jason?
Oh,
Did you lose me?
Jason, yes,
We
we lost
did.
you.
It's the cat. So what I was saying is the cat hit the mute button. The
hello.
suspect is known, and
Right.
the suspect is also probably responsible or potentially responsible for more murders. And it's neat to see all these people come together to try and not just bring justice, but bring healing to the families, because several of the victims are also missing. So
I think one of the
I
reasons
love knowing you. Yeah.
I liked it when I first started listening to it because, I teach English and psychology, and I really appreciated the care Brandon takes. That his episodes are really carefully written, and I like that he's taking a very ethical approach to investigating. Um, and it's a very powerful story, a series of stories, and I think we're going to get somewhere with it. I think we're going to push law enforcement towards investigating more.
I think you actually have already, but we
I
don't
think it's
officially know. But I think you have already, possibly. I may have heard. Sophie, how about you?
Oh my. How did I find you? The prosecutors.
Oh wow, Trent.
Yeah. Um, I think it was just in the chats on the lives, and we went back and forth and laughed about things and made little jokes. And then I don't remember who it was. They said that you had your own podcast. So I was like, well, I have to listen. So I did. And I just really appreciate all the things that you talk about. I love listening to people and hearing stories, and I love hearing how people's minds work. And I love sometimes the randomness that comes with your interviews, and it's really enjoyable. Um, I just love it, and I love you, so it's
Aw,
great.
I love you too. You already know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I've said it on air, but like Sophie's the person who comes and finds me when I'm trying to hide. And she checks in. I think, yeah, you mentioned the randomness of the interviews, but like, Jason said this before, we come up with scripts that end up being ideas for people. But I really believe in the idea that, like, I don't know the story that my guests really have to tell, and only they really know it. So I can come up with whatever plan, but I just need to listen to them as they talk and figure out where it's supposed to go.
And I love that, and it feels so much more real when it's like that. When it sounds like an actual conversation between people who genuinely care about what the other one is saying.
Yeah. Awesome. Bob, Elizabeth, I think you're the last for our where'd you find us and why on earth are you still here?
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay. Well, this is going to be redundant, but the prosecutors is where I first started chatting with you during a live, I believe. Just we were chatting about things, and I saw your name, and I have a memory somewhat of an elephant, and
Mm-hmm.
I went, "Is this the Jason Blair?"
The
And
one or possibly two only.
yes, and so I was intrigued because I remember you went through it, and you in the chats were just so lovely and so kind, and to go through all of that and to come out um, being so resilient and so hopeful, it was really, to me, touched in my heart, and I thought, I want to know this person because um, you are just such a strong person.
Oh,
And
that's
so anyhow, that's how I found you, and I came to call you my friend, and love you bunches.
and you moderate our fireside chat group, which
Yes,
is
sir.
awesome. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the going through it. Like, I really think to some extent, yes, I went through something and it was very difficult, but I think an important piece of that is like I did it to myself, right? Like, I'm responsible for it, and I'm also responsible for finding good to come out of it, but it changed my life. I tell people all the time that like it was horrible, but if I had to go through it again and you gave me a magic wand and you told me this is the only way I would grow into who I am right now, with like more humility and more love for people and more compassion for people, I it's crazy, but I would do it again. So
Mhm. Well, and I think, many people do that, Jason. However, you are in the public eye too. And to me, that's even more of a mountain. And to come through that, I'm in awe of you, honestly.
well, what I really hope like people realize by hearing my story that it's very similar to what's going on in their lives on a much more private level. And I hope they look at my story and say, if somebody could have gotten through this in a public
Mhm.
sphere, I can
Absolutely.
find a private space to help me get through it.
Yes.
Like, it gives people,
Hmm.
hopefully, it gives them hope.
Yeah.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Bob, last but not least.
So this is going to be different. I heard about you on the prosecutor's podcast.
Really?
Yeah,
Please.
shocking, right?
Wow.
Huh.
Totally shocking. Yeah. It really, and then I started listening, and it just put you in that mindset of I'm sitting down having a conversation with a good friend, even though I'm not talking, although I probably am out loud. If you were around me, you'd see earbuds in and I'm talking because I'm participating. But it's such an honest back and forth conversation that I think is so important for all of us to participate in. And the entire community, and I'll say it, true crime community in air quotes, but just the community that we've all seemed to connected and made has been really some of the best people I know.
Mm.
It's really been impressive because there's parts of the true crime community that aren't ideal, but there are really good people out there, and they really have hearts, and they really care about what's going on and what they can do, and it's just been refreshing. I've just really been amazed how nice it's been.
Yeah. And I would have never guessed in entering it that the most amazing thing about it is like watching people who are the listeners show love to each other in addition to caring
Yes,
about the cases. And to
yes,
me, it's like, wow, you've landed in true crime because you like the podcast, and now you're making a huge difference in that person's life, one person's life.
absolutely. Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Well, that was getting us started, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it to Sophie. Um, and yeah, I know I deliberately pick you as the first person.
Uh,
But you mentioned that we had noticed each other in the chats, and for the prosecutors, and I always felt like you were really nice and you were really funny, and I enjoyed going back and forth with you. But over time, like anytime you answered a longer question, I was like, oh wow, this woman is so wise. And and then I would see you make comments about yourself, and I'm like, and she has no bloody idea how wise she is. And there was this one time where we were having a fun back and forth in one of the chats, and we were talking about something. I don't even remember what it is because it doesn't stick out in my mind anymore. But you had made a comment about like Bigfoot, right? And your frustration with some people making flippant jokes about Bigfoot. And you began to sort of tell us about how it fit within Native American cultures. And I'll let you say it because you'll say it better than I would. And what really moved me about it was just how informative and thoughtful it was, but you were able to communicate it in a way where the people in the conversation didn't feel defensive or threatened about being insensitive, and we all sort of like grew and learned something important uh, later. And I don't think I've ever told you, but I went into work, and one of my best friends at work, she's Native American, and we started talking about it, and it created sort of like a deeper connection for us and a
that's
meaningful
cool.
thing. Yeah. And so I just wanted to ask you about like community and connection, and they mean so many different things to so many different people, but I feel like you've added so much to, at least in my mind, the Jason community, the community that's important to me. I don't mean necessarily this podcast community. So I'll go ahead and throw it to you.
Well, thank you for having me. Bonjour.
Hmm?
That means hello. Um,
What language?
it's Ojibwe.
Ah, nice.
I'm an enrolled member of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa.
Hmm.
So communities, I feel like that's such a broad term. I belong to many communities, but my involvement in them varies. Um, like I'm from my town, I'm from my reservation, I'm part of running communities, mom communities, podcast communities, but my involvement with each one of them is different.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was growing up, I didn't really feel like I was a part of any community. I was kind of the outsider of both. I didn't feel really part of my res community because I'm blonde and I have blue eyes. We lived just on the outside of the reservation, so not even on the res. But then when I went to town, it was different because I didn't really fit in there either. So when you bring up me defending Bigfoot, it's just, it kind of ties back into something I've had to do my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in town, looking how I look, people would make comments about Native people all the time, and they would do it in front of me, because why not?
You would have never thought you would.
Yeah. So
I've
when
told people, like a lot of people I know who are black or they're fill in the blank, and I've told a lot of them like it's really interesting when you land in a conversation with a bunch of people who look like you. It would be shocking what you'd hear them actually say.
right. So all throughout my life growing up, I would hear those things and I would speak up about it. So it seemed very normal to just mention it in that chat. But I think as I've grown up, I've figured out how to do it in a way that isn't so offensive to other people. Because before I'd be like, shut up,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't need to be like that anymore. And if I can teach people who I know care, then that's what I want to do.
One of our this reminds me of one of our really early guests, John Mitchell. He's like a coach. They call him the Purple Coach, but he grew up half black, half white. He was in the his father was in the Air Force, and like this was the 19 probably late 1960s, 1970s. And one of the things that he said on the episode was the idea of, for him, like living in a white world and not feeling on the inside, or inside feeling like an outsider, and then moving to Boston at some point and living in a black community and still not feeling on the inside. And sort of like, it wasn't until he moved to later in his life and found his community that he finally found as if or found a space where he was accepted. And I kind of thought about that when you were just saying that.
Yeah, I guess, and now that I'm older and now that I'm, I guess, more comfortable with who I am and I know who I am, I feel like I do fit in
Yeah.
more with my reservation community than I did when I was younger. But also for me, I feel like an ideal true community is just you feel like you belong.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's some spiritual or cultural or historical connection that you feel it's where what you say matters, where you know that you matter, where you know you can make a difference. The what you say people want to hear. You want to hear what other people are saying.
That they're actually listening to you.
Yeah. So that to me is a true community, and I think that you can get that in all different parts of your life. Like these podcast communities are a true community to me.
Right.
Like these group of people, you guys with the prosecutors too, and in the North Pole, and I feel like those are true communities. But I think, and then I think also that that connects to being a family.
Yeah. 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 I think, I grew up with like great mom and dad and a great brother. So sometimes in my head I conflate, um, like your closest loved ones with family, but I think you can find that family in a lot of different places. And I think we do all need it. We need people we listen to who share our values, who want to grow or want to learn or whatever it is, whichever piece. I was going to ask you, Carly, like, what does that idea of community mean to you? And what, yeah, I'm asking you in part because you're like at the center of so many communities and you help them grow, you help people be connected, you're always there with a kind word. um you know I'm not going to say, by the way, that you're the nicest person on earth like Jason does, because I feel like that puts pressure on you to be the nicest person on earth. So um,
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that word belonging, it's interesting to me. I I I was actually surprised this year, I think, on my end, of how important that was for me. I was on one episode with a minister, John Cleghorn, who actually is the son of college dean, who was very meaningful and very supportive of me during the time that you're talking about, Elizabeth, during the difficult times. And, you know, I realized, like, for me, that when I was growing up, my church was the place where I had my sense of belonging, and then that was severed. And then the New York Times and newspapers and journalism were the place that I had my sense of belonging, and that was severed. And there was a recent incident where occasionally people will get really mad at me for existing, where somebody jumped on me, and it normally rolls off my back, right? But this one didn't. And I think it was in part that I think I have this enormous fear internally of losing my sense of uh, belonging. And again, compounded, of course, with losing my mom this year. But Bob, I saw you head nodding during Carly, so I wanted to give you a chance to jump in.
Uh, I just I couldn't agree more with what they said. It's just a group of people that you just connect with at a, a different level, and it really spoke to me when several of us who were at CrimeCon, when meeting people and realizing just how much you are similar to other people, and just how in my mind, I don't know people I know normally, as I'll say normally, face to face, that have the interests that I have,
Mm.
like this, like the podcasting, like Carly was saying, and then you meet all these people that do like it, right? And then you realize, oh wow, but you also like other things that are outside of that. It's very much what Carly was saying. It's I think that's spot on.
Someone said to me this year, we're like all weirdos in our own world, and they just weren't talking about like true crime people. They were saying like everybody is a weirdo in their own world. They've got something where it's like abnormal that they're interested in it. But one of the great things, many horrible things about social media, many horrible things about the internet at large.
Of
But
course.
one of the great things about it is that it allows you to find that like sense of belonging that Carly's talking about, that community that Sophie's talking about. So I'm gonna throw it to anybody else who wants to talk. I think Elizabeth wants to talk because I see little signs. So let me throw in community, loved ones. Feel free to talk about the holidays, family. I know Jen definitely. I want to know what your holidays community from your perspective. But go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, I was just typing, you can find your fellow weirdos, people that it's amazing to me through the prosecutors. I found people like Sophie was saying, talk about Bigfoot. And, up until this year, my husband thought Bigfoot was not real until he saw something on the internet. I don't know. He's like, Bigfoot's real. I'm sitting trying to do work, and all of a sudden he's yelling at the kitchen table, Bigfoot is real. And I said, well, yeah, I know. I've been telling you that for 5 years. But, um, and then, a lot of the paranormal stuff, especially during October, and just finding people that share your interests where you may not have that other places. And I also typed about, I have friends who are interested in true crime, but they will not listen to a podcast. I do
Mm.
not know why. They just have no interest whatsoever in listening to podcasts. And they love Dateline. I said, oh, Dateline has a podcast. Nope, won't listen to it. So so I think it is one of the good things. There's a lot of bad about the internet. There's a lot of bad about Facebook. Um, but I think to me, one of the most redeeming qualities of social media is finding people that share your interests. And where I used to live, Jason, that you are now calling Northern Virginia, which I disagree, but anyhow,
Which part of Northern Virginia are you talking about? The North Carolina edition that we
well,
had it
I
on?
really disagree about that, but we draw the line at the Rappahannock River. You can have all of north of the Rappahannock. That's all you.
We can do license plate readers to figure it out.
That's right, exactly. But there were so many people that would, or it was very transient because Northern
Mhm,
Virginia is a transient area. So you would
mhm.
make friends and then they would leave. And
Yep.
it's like, it's very hard keeping friendships. But here, if, Jennifer, she's in another country across a huge pond. And then there's, if Carly moves, okay, that's fine. She can move wherever she wants to, but she's still part of the community. So I find that very refreshing too, that even though you're not in proximity physically to one another, you're still part of the community wherever you are. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like how you define the North Pole, Richie. It is what you make it. So
Oh, it is what you make it is how you
yes,
do
because
it.
some of us have broken off into it is tropical. So the North Pole has salty blue water and palm trees and rum drinks. So there's
The
there's quite a contingent.
there's a fair debate about that. I'm guessing there are no like meteorologists or physicists who are part of the tropical argument.
It's magic. It's
Right. Oh yes, magicians.
magical. So
Magicians. Well, so let me throw it to anybody else who wants to throw something in about uh, community. And I just echoing what you guys were saying, and I've said it 1,000 times, and everyone's going to get bored about it. It's just amazing to have this community, and like I don't tell all the stories, but I think if you guys could be in my inbox for like 6 months and see all the messages people send about how our episodes or our community of listeners have had a positive impact on their lives. I mean, I think it would just bring joy to to people to be able to see that. So Jen, Jason, Kathy, you want to throw anything in on this one? Mm, mhm.
Right.
Or even Jen, to your point, like churches, families, all sorts of different communities. I don't think it just applies there, but like there can be so much judgment sometimes. I had no idea though that you found this community right around the time you were having a break from another community. Was it like a short period of time, or was it like Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's so awesome. Kathy, I'm going to turn to you, then I'm going to turn it to Jason. So,
All right. Well, I'm always grateful to find new communities. I think in part because I I'm single and I don't have children, and as I head towards the end of my career, I'm starting to be really conscious of making sure that I'm building a community around me, whether they're people that are here in town near me that I can spend actual physical time with, or people that share my interests, because I know how dangerous it can be for people as they age to be alone. And so it's been really valuable to meet people online and through podcasts that share my interests, and also just I can feel needed, you know. I mean, I think when I first got involved with the Snake River Killer podcast, it was during a time when I was feeling really depressed and alone and old. And contacted Brandon and had ideas about the show and about the cases. And I felt really invited in, and as if my ideas and my thinking were valuable. And I don't always feel that way in my daily life. I teach high school and I'm starting to feel like I'm aging out a little bit. I don't know if I have the Riz or whatever it is the kids are calling it this year. And try to maintain my sense of humor, but I'm really conscious of the fact that it's only going to be a few years before I'm just not going to be able to keep up. And I'm trying to be really attuned to what kind of world I'm building for myself after I'm done being a teacher, which has been my entire adult life.
yeah. No, that makes complete sense to me, that piece of it. Jason?
Just gonna throw it on me like that, I guess.
Yeah. No. No,
Um,
no easy transition for you, buddy.
I know. I'm the king of those, right? Um, so I'll be really, really honest with you guys. Like the last several years for me have been very difficult. Um, I have not felt like I had a community. I have not felt like I have had people there for me, by and large. Sam Maybe a Criminal actually has created that community for me because people have rushed to it with their hopefulness, I think. And I think in a lot of ways, like that's what I was searching for, is try to find some way to make I was trying to find that, when I was writing it. And as I continue to write it, still trying to find it often.
Jason, we were talking yesterday, I think on one of your events that I mentioned that idea that I believe nostalgia is
Yes.
our mourning for something that we've lost, and
Yeah.
it's also a roadmap for what we want to bring in to the world. And I actually think your podcast is a great example of that by focusing on like Santa and Christmas and the holidays. It is very much nostalgic, right? Like,
Right.
it takes me back to peaceful and simple times in life, but
Right.
at the exact same time it's also a roadmap. I can look at those feelings and those emotions that it evokes in me, and get a roadmap for what I want to bring into my life. And just based on listening to what you're saying, it sounds like that's exactly what happened with your podcast. Like that is what you just described, was like
It
going
is.
through a
And
loss. You lost something, you didn't have it, you found it through nostalgia.
yeah, in a lot of ways, that's true. I mean, we can't go through a therapy session now, but there are a lot of things that I've lost and I've never found, never had, and then now like finding them and those things. And um, like, I think the key for it was me writing this show, because I finally, like, I didn't have a lot of I've written, a couple movies, I've written stuff, a bunch of screenplays, um, but I never had any confidence in myself until I started actually writing Santa May Be a Criminal, and I thought this show would mean nothing to anybody, just like most of it has never meant anything to anybody. And what I found was that I think a lot of people were feeling the same way as I was, and they started to find it and they started to fuel it. And then what it has done is it opened up my entire world, and it has given me, it's the greatest joy of my life, besides being a dad, to be working on the show and to have people tell me, as you have told me, that the show has touched you in a very, very personal and endearing way. Bob has shared that with me. Jen, Carly, they've all shared that with me. Bree on our live yesterday shared that with me in a way that like just brings me to tears, because my intention was just to write a show. It was not to do something that was meaningful to people. I wanted it to be meaningful for me, but what I didn't understand was that like it being meaningful to people would make it so much more meaningful to me than I could possibly imagine, and has provided avenues for me to have the most special people in my life enter my story,
Yeah.
and it's just been really, really great.
It reminds me of like we were talking earlier about sort of like the bad things that I did that then led to like such good things. It's like your sadness led to a pursuit, and that pursuit led to joy, and so it's really joy that came out of sadness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's sort of the never-ending pursuit of life, right? You're trying to find joy, you're trying to find something that makes you feel complete and whole, and you don't stop chasing until you find it. And so,
and it's like sort of like it has different shades. Like Kathy talked about like shaping her future, and you're getting at the idea of, I think, healing and finding joy, and I think Bob and Carly and got at the idea of like bringing a sense of belonging, and then also finding community for Sophie and Jen. And I think in so many levels we're talking about, like, if I could wrap it all up and steal one of those phrases, it's like it's really belonging in the sense, even when you're talking about Kathy shaping our future, it's like finding our place in the world. Yes. Finding whether for you it's purpose or it's meaning or it's where you feel most whole. Like it's not something that just comes to you. You have to work at it and make effort. Mm-hmm. And then that idea of loss, like that Jason's talking about, like he lost something during that time, is like a decent transition to something else I wanted to talk about. Like a big theme of the year for me on the podcast has been loss. And the obvious one is, I lost my mom, but Gloria, who we were talking about before, came on. She lost her cousin, 30 years ago, and it still hurts. Greg Ligon, who talked about being a part of a cult, like he lost his religious community and lost a piece of himself. Like one of my early guests, Jerry Colonna, I was going to have him on to talk about like his work in executive coaching and his former work as a venture capitalist. And like immediately the conversation just flowed to his childhood and his father's alcoholism, his mother's mental illness, and having to hide under the bed and listening to the footsteps as his father came on. And that was like the loss of a youth for him, an ability to be a child or be a kid. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about loss. And Bob, I know you've openly talked about losing your son, and I have a hard time even understanding what that must be like. Like, we have words for widow, we have words for all sorts of different things, but I don't even think we have a word for parents who lose their children. And so I'm going to just throw it out to you, because we had a conversation where we were talking about that Anderson Cooper, Steve Colbert video where Colbert says, or Cooper asked Colbert about a comment he made about like what punishments of God are not a gift. And like, it was really hard to understand that when I first heard it. Jason actually is the one who shared it with me. And over time, I've come to realize that there's probably some truth, but it's really hard to see sometimes. So, Bob.
It is hard to see, and there is truth, because it was 30-something years ago when I was young and was a paramedic, and I was gung-ho and cocky and probably arrogant to boot. And, I'd take an approach, and when that happened, I was just totally blindsided, and it just completely changed my outlook on what's going on in the world, what's going on around me, and it totally changed my approach. So I was much more compassionate and caring, because, and maybe that's just part of the normal process somewhere along the lines. Maybe you learn that, but for me, it was a dramatic shift, an immediate hit, if you will. And as time went on, it really made a difference in how I interacted with people, especially in that role when I was a paramedic in that role. And it wasn't until recently did I realize I handled that like I handled all of those horrible things you see in that world with the paramedics. I compartmentalized and put it away. But the one thing about the compartmentalization, and it does help you survive through it, then you still have to go deal with it at some point. And so I didn't realize until in the last year or so that it's hit me again. And there was so much around that time that I just blocked out, that I've started realizing. And a cathartic moment for me, ironically enough, was going to CrimeCon, because where he's buried is a fairly decent trip from where I'm at. And it's been a couple of years since I've been there. And by going there, it was like those 30-something years had just came around in full circle for me. It was a totally different feeling, as emotional as it was. And all of that happens with all of our interactions. We all change, and this, just listen to all of you. It was like everything's happening, things in your life changes, and you go through certain things, and that kind of makes us who we are. And I don't know that I would give that up. Jason, you mentioned that about, if I could end up with the same results I have today, I would go through it again. As would I. I literally would go through it again.
Yeah. It's hard to even imagine. So, like, I mean, I understand, like, what you're saying is, like, it's made you a better human being. I have a guest who's not going to come on, and she gave this stark example of exactly what you're talking about, Bob. She said, so she's a detective, and she's been one for a long time. And before that, she worked in a coroner's office. And she said that she and her husband used to joke, like, I don't understand why, or that they didn't understand that why people would go and rush to hug their loved ones after they died of violent death. And her husband earlier this year died in a motorcycle accident. He was a prosecutor and she was a detective, and they worked together. And it's the first thing she did. And she, once he died in the hospital, and she said in that moment, like, she felt sadness, but she also knew at the same time this was going to make her a better human.
Yeah. And as hard as that feels at the time, or even going through it, it's still about choices, I guess, right? And you need the right framework You need the right community. As we bring that back around, you need the right people. And for me, ultimately, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go forward. I'm gonna survive somehow, um, whatever that is. Would have never in a million years guessed what how it progressed and where I am today, and I'm so thankful for it. But it wasn't what I had sketched out,
Right.
right?
It wasn't the plan.
It
Right.
wasn't the plan. But as I joke now, I tell my wife this all the time. I said, I have to have a plan no matter what it is. I don't care if the plan changes 25 times. I'm fine with it. I just need a plan. And
Mm.
that's what's kept me going, So I know, okay, tomorrow I'm supposed to go do X, Y, and Z. Well, fine. Now I have something to do tomorrow. So I get up and I get ready, and I may end up doing O, P, and Q, right? But it's I don't know. It's just kind of weird in a way, but
One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time.
sometimes
Right.
whatever it takes, right? Yeah,
I had a
exactly.
therapist who I was such a mess and so anxious. She was like, Jason, you just have to take it one day at a time. And I'm like bawling, crying. And she's like, okay, maybe 1 minute for you. And it was so true. Like 1 minute. I was thinking about what Bob was saying, Jen, and what you said before about like finding your community right before, you had that revelation. And I was just thinking about like, there's like a cost to not processing your trauma. Like you have to process it to find that gift. I was gonna just ask if you found any truth to that in your experience with that group. And mm-hmm. One of the things that you just said there, Jen, like that idea of like reflection. Only after reflection can we even see that there's a loss sometimes, and that many of these different things like having your children early may have created losses even though it's a joyous thing. But like thinking about like you grew up in South Africa, right? And you would normally think for somebody who's white who grew up in South Africa during apartheid, hey, not that bad, right? But like you guys lost a certain amount of innocence and ability to be youth and all sorts of things because of that experience. What was that like? Mm, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to recognize that you can be going through an enormous loss for you as someone else is going through one that appears to be bigger beside them, but they can be just as meaningful. They can be just as impactful. Yeah. Well, one thing I've learned over time, like the comparison game when it comes to pain makes no sense because pain is pain, right? Like there's this quote I like to use that pain, it's Khalil Gibran, is the breaking of the shell that encloses our understanding of the world. And that for a 4-year old who breaks his toy, that pain is as deep as it is for us when we're older. And that also got me to stop using the line "there's starving children in Africa," because that pain in that moment is just as is so unbelievably deep. So I've learned over time that like I cannot compare my pain to someone else's, and it plays out in helping me be more compassionate with other people. But the surprising part for me is it makes me be more compassionate toward myself. Like I lost that memento, which is not really a big deal and it doesn't really matter, but it hurts that much. And that's okay and it's valid. Thanks for. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. About giving yourself grace to yourself. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kathy, I know I told some people in my group, but I don't know if I told you this, but that when I went out into Idaho in the Lewis Clark Valley, every place somewhere something horrible happened, I turned around and tried to find a beautiful picture. And that was my only coping mechanism to be able to manage that. And I know to all of Jen's points, everyone probably on this call, most people on this call probably believe that it's that what she's saying is true about comparison, but at the same time, we were probably also comparing ourselves to her and Bob as that was happening. So me talking right now is the long prelude that lets you move past that, because I wanted to open it up to everybody else just about like your own losses and what's come of them, whether it's good or bad, or that you feel you can share.
I'm trying to sort of organize my thoughts around this.
It's fun.
I feel like, I mean, in part, I feel guilty because I have been very fortunate in that I have not experienced big losses, and anxious because I know that they're ahead of me, right? That my parents are still alive and doing well, but they're 84.
Mm.
But I feel like I'm going through a period right now where I'm really lucky that I'm content with my job and my life, and I have so many things to be thankful for that I can use that strength and that just power, I think, that comes from being happy and content and not feeling a real emptiness. I'm trying to use that to give back to other people that I know are experiencing or have experienced loss. It's one of the things that's drawn me to the podcast and to working with Brandon, is that I know I can't feel what those people feel, but I can lend what I can do to help alleviate their pain. And my hope is that the work that I do and the research that we're doing might be able to help other people with the loss that they've experienced.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to contribute my lack of loss to help other people who've haven't had it as, haven't been as fortunate as I've been.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I mean, that kind of goes back to that like piece of it. The only thing I would add to Colbert's point is like loss can be a gift if you choose to make it. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but you can certainly choose for it to just remain a punishment.
Right. Well, I had a marriage that ended, and I had anticipated that I would be a person who was married and had family. And it's turned out that not being married has allowed me to do so many amazing things, right? I wrote for
Right.
TV for a year. I've had a great teaching career. I'm doing this podcasting. I have the freedom to come and go as I please. And it's not something I would have predicted at the time when my marriage was ending and I felt like I'd failed.
So
But I'm
Kathy's
20
humble.
years out.
Do you guys know about her TV writing?
No.
Tell them about your TV writing.
And I'm going to tell you about that as I guess you could view it as a loss as well, because I wasn't good at it. And I was uninvited back, which is a sort of my way of saying that I was basically fired.
I heard she was good at it.
Well, long story short, I did the same thing I did with Brandon. I wrote to a writer whose work I admired, and that writer was Rob Thomas, and we became friends. And then he invited me to come write for the show. And at the time, the first time he asked me, I said no, because I was still married. And then in the course of a year, my marriage ended. And so when he invited me to come write for the second season, I said yes. And it was a huge learning experience. I'd been a teacher for 15 years, and then I went to live in Hollywood, and it was just bizarre, a very strange experience, but I learned a lot.
Unexpected.
And it was sort of, for a long time, I couldn't admit to people that I had been, let go. And now I laugh. I mean, who cares, right? It's so far behind me now, and I've become good at the thing that I do and love the most, which is being a teacher. And it's just a little glitch in the background, I guess. An interesting
Or
one.
the thing that helps you find the thing that you loved, because what are the odds if that hadn't happened, you wouldn't have found
It turns out sitting at a table for 6 hours a day with people is not my thing.
that.
That as much as I love writing and ideas, sitting at a table talking about them with people for 6 hours just was not my groove. And teaching high school, you have to be active, right?
Let me throw it out to you guys. I want to ask 2 questions. Double-barreled question, imagine that. One, I wanted to ask you guys about like what episode or guest was most meaningful to you this year, and I also want to ask you about the most meaningful experiences for you this year, period. And I'm going to start with, I think, Jason. And then I'm going to work my way through the screen, which will take me to Elizabeth, Jen, Bob, Carly, Sophie, then Kathy. So prepare yourselves.
Jason was trying to hide behind his cup just then. It didn't work, Jason.
Jason thinks we can hear him.
He's just
Sorry.
trying to buy time here.
Sorry. Yeah, I was actually saying all the really naughty things about calling on me first. It's just like I hope you guys can redub all the bad things I said over that. Yeah. So I've loved so many of the things that you've done this year in terms of interviews. Of course, I have a very special place in my heart for Brett and Alice. I think you gave them an opportunity to really showcase the people that they are and the people that I know, because I edit their show, so I know them pretty well, particularly Brett. And I think that you really gave them an opportunity to shine through the way that you allow everybody else to shine, and that you open up the opportunity for people to be who they are. And only someone who is so empathetic and so kind and understands, who's lived the wars as we've discussed in their lives. And you did that for me too, by the way. But like, I just think you understand, like there's no reason to take the I'm sorry, that was that came up. That was my free storage alert. But it was like you find a way to like just create a safe space for people, because I think you understand that there have been a lot of unsafe spaces for people.
Yeah.
And as I've told you since the first time I ever talked to you, like I admire so much your thirst for curiosity, the way that you really want to get to know people. And it's so beyond artifice, it's so beyond surface. It is, you want to drill down and get to know the people. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be able to get to work with you in the coming year.
Yeah.
And I respect you so much. And so that's part of the question. What was the second part of the question?
Meaningful thing for you this year. And one thing, while you think of that, I'll say something Brett said. So when I wanted him to come on in October to talk about unexplained things, I was like, hey man, I know you're really busy. I know you blah, 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 but could I get you to come on for this? And he said, I'd come on to talk to you about anything. Right. And I said, why? Of course, because I was curious. And he said, essentially because he comes on and we have these natural conversations and he figures out things. And one of the things he figured out in that first episode was how important community was. So I'm glad we as a community have been able to give back to Brett and Alice in the same way that they've given to us. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they've done a really good job of fostering that community. And it's very special. Like they're really, really special kind of people, and I appreciate my adjacency to them. So meaningful things. So I said somebody posted on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Twitter. I call it Twitter still, so I'll always call it Twitter. Somebody posted on Twitter a couple weeks ago about like, what are you the most thankful for this year? And I said, the friendships I've made, the people I've met, or something like that. And so, I didn't know a lot of you all, and and some of you I still don't know in real life. I've like not met you in person. But I went to Austin back, when was that? Like August, maybe? I don't know when it
Before
was.
then,
August.
Carly
Was it
will probably know. She's
Was it
nodding.
August?
Yes,
So
August.
it's August, right? So I'm sitting there, and I'm at the bar talking to people, and I get a big hug from somebody from behind. And who was it? But it was Carly.
Shocking.
And right. And then I go to CrimeCon, and I get a hug from Bob, and I get a hug from you, Jason. I got a hug from you, or actually earlier. We went to dinner. We won't talk about the dinner, but I don't want to get in trouble here. But I got a hug from you then, and I've gotten so many amazing. I've got so much. Again, it goes back to the thing that I was saying earlier. Like, it's really hard to produce anything. First of all, it's hard when you're carrying around baggage from your whole life, too. But the people that you meet along the way, who give you the hugs, who give you the smiles, who tell you they appreciate you, who tell you that they now believe in Christmas after they hadn't for years. Like Jen told me, I hope that's not out at school, Jen. You told me that. Like so many people have said that, like, my little tiny show that I produce in this little tiny office has meant something to them. Has been like, again, like I can't even describe how much it makes me feel like I've done something really, really important. And the people are the most important thing to me, and I love all of you for that. So
I mean, I think that thing that you're talking about, like those people who say you brought back Christmas for them, to me, what it really means for me when I say something like that is you've brought back hope for me in something more innocent and pure and good. And I think that's like at its core what some of those people are talking about. And it's represented by Christmas. But
right.
Isn't it interesting, Jason, that the exact same thing you were trying to create for yourself by doing this, by working on this, is the exact same thing you've created for so many people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I sort of danced around this earlier. We talked about the nostalgia factor, and I think that for so many people, Christmas, I mean, you connect with that because it's before you have all the baggage, before you have all the problems, like it's an innocent, pure, beautiful time where you're just, you're receiving something really happy, right? And like I think I was like trying to like get back there myself, and in some kind of way, some people have come along for that ride, and I could not ever express my appreciation for those things that people have, embraced the show or have supported me. So
It's awesome.
you're awesome, man. Thank you. I'm gonna go cry now.
Okay. Feel free. You can stay here and do that. Elizabeth.
Okay, so I'm going to be quick because I do want to piggyback or circle back to what Kathy was talking about quickly. I think my favorite episodes, I have several. I did like the one, of course, with the prosecutors. I did really enjoy that. I love the one with Robert Farmer too.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, from the Broken Systems
yeah,
podcast.
getting
He
to know him and what he's trying to do and bring about in the true crime community. And of course, the was it Lost Sheep, the one about the
Murder
religious
She.
cult,
Oh, about what?
the religious cult, the
Oh yes, Greg Ligon.
yes,
Yeah,
Yes.
he was a
yeah.
part of that cult.
So I thought those were really good. And of course, my favorite is that attorney you had on that does guardianships.
Yeah, I was
That was
waiting
my
for
favorite.
either you or Jason to mention your own episode. Yeah, I felt that to me, Elizabeth, I would have never guessed that topic or thought of that topic, and I'm so glad you brought it up to me because, there's this whole space of law that's very different, that's meant to help people and protect people. And
Mhm.
I found that so powerful because I think we don't always think, and mental health is near and dear to me, but we don't always think of that aspect of it, or the people who are going out and fighting those battles and dealing with all that stress and complications, trying to balance people's rights with their well-being. So,
Mhm.
that was definitely one of my favorite episodes to do. And that granny kidnapping case, whoa.
Yeah, I'm telling you, second year in practice. I haven't seen anything like it. Probably never will. So,
Let's pray.
yes, let's. But to circle back on what Kathy was saying, I went through a divorce, which is like a death. It's a loss. It was unexpected. It kind of hit me out of nowhere, and I would say it was as traumatic as losing my mother. But it's different because the person is still alive, the person you loved, your best friend, and it's like a whole your world has been turned upside down. Am I glad it happened now, almost 10 years later? Absolutely. I'm in a better place. I would not have done what I'm doing, I don't think, if I was still in that relationship. So um, it was meant to be, and it happened. And it was hard to see at the time, but it was I came through it a better person. So there is something to be said for that. And the worst the most hurtful loss I had, other than that one, was when my father died. And I believe I told you, Jason, I'm not sure, that he told me on his deathbed that he never loved me, and he called me a bunch of names that were not very nice. And that was Christmas Eve, and he ended up passing about 3 or 4 weeks later.
Mm.
And and I will say that probably messed me up just as much as the divorce. But like you were saying, you have to face the trauma, you have to face that grief head on
Yeah.
and work through it. And so during the holidays, it's a little hard to go back. And but now I have pity for him, and that he was just not a very nice person. And it is a bit freeing as well that he's not here any longer to because he criticized me my entire life.
Have you
And
ever, Elizabeth, heard of Judith Vorse, the children's book writer?
no.
She wrote this book on loss, and I keep it bookmarked, like one section of it bookmarked on my computer. And what you were saying about those, like, you know, your mother's loss and how deep it was, but your divorce, it also was a loss, like a death, but the person walking around, or that even when your father died, the loss wasn't his death but those words.
Hmm.
And in it, Vorse says that, like, when we think of loss, we think of loss through death, right, of
Hmm.
the people that we love. But loss is a far more encompassing theme in our life, for we lose not only through death, but also leaving and being left by changing and letting go and moving on. And and then she says like, and our losses not only include our separations and departures from those we love, but our conscious and unconscious losses of romantic dreams, impossible expectations, illusions of freedom and power, illusions of safety, and even sort of the loss of our younger self, that self that thought it would be unwrinkled and invulnerable and immortal.
Mhm.
And, like we lose when we're little kids, when we realize that our mother's love can't just be ours alone, or that when we're parents and we realize that things can't just be kissed and made better, or we lose when because of our anatomy we don't have an opportunity, and we lose when we see the flaws in any connection that we have. Loss is everywhere, but what she says at the end is that you know we can't provide ourselves protection from loss. It's a part of life,
Mhm.
and those losses are necessary because we grow by losing and leaving and letting go. And
Mhm.
she ends powerfully with like, for the road to human development is paved with renunciation. Throughout our life, we grow by giving up. We give up some of our deepest attachments to others. We give up certain cherished parts of ourselves. We must conform in the dreams we dream, as well as our intimate relationships, all that we will never have and never will be. And that passionate investment leaves us vulnerable to loss. And sometimes, no matter how clever we are, we must lose. And it reminds me of Queen Elizabeth's quote, which is like, grief is the price we pay for having loved.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Elizabeth, for
Yeah.
sharing that. Jen, right? Well, and I think that's one of the things that I've learned over time, not just with divorce, but like loss in general. We as humans have a natural tendency when something bad like that is happening to somebody to turn it in a party, right? Because that's our version of kissing it and making it go away better. And that there's a certain laziness and failure to putting a positive spin on everything. Yeah, yeah. Did you know that the first time Victoria, and she and I have been friends for a while, ever thought about the the reason why she, as a business professor, decided to research attachment. She realized in the episode that it was the loss of her husband in her 20s. Yep. First time she ever thought of it. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Mm. Yeah. That is true. All right, Bob.
Okay, so I like so many of the episodes, but Julia Callie's episode I think is one of my favorites. Of course, everybody and Jason's as well. I think those are. Um,
What was it about Julia's episode that stuck out to you?
I think it was kind of just the whole feel. I'm always been so fascinated by profiling, and so that itself may have just drew me in because I do love their podcast too that she does. That's and specifically, I think really it was the whole experience when I walked away. I don't know how to give it better description than that, but and then I think meaningful this year. A couple of things. My wife, who's really my best friend, we're very close. She's been a great support with a lot of things that are going on, and the other big major thing that makes me smile is, of course, the birth of my grandson. Actually, just celebrated his first birthday, and he is what a joy it is. And my wife and I both, since we got married later in life, we didn't see each other with small kids, and she is exactly with him as I would have expected her to be, and it's really a really loving and rewarding, and it's so fun to see that. So it's like we got to experience that because he only lives a couple of miles away, so we get to see him all the time. So that's been a really happy place. Puts everything else in perspective where maybe some other things aren't so worrisome.
Yeah.
You know?
I absolutely get that.
Yeah.
I absolutely get that. I guess we're gonna go to Sophie, who has to pick her son up soon because on brand for every episode I do, if you schedule it for X amount of time, multiply that by 2, and that's the actual amount of time.
What did I say?
Well, and I told her, I was like, it might run later, but
He sent me a text today. I was like, it'll be wrapping up around 2. He's like, so
No, you
4.
said 1:30, and I said
1:30. So he said 4.
You mean 4, and you said probably 5.
well, I thought I had till 2:30, but I was wrong.
Go for it.
So what was my favorite
Favorite
episode?
episode or episodes, and then something meaningful for you this year.
It's really hard for me to pick a favorite. I love all the episodes with all the other podcasters. I think they're all great. I love the one with Elizabeth. That was so interesting to me. But if I had to pick a non-podcaster, it would be Greg
Greg
Ligon.
Ligon. Yeah, that's the Colts episode. What was it about that one? A number of people have mentioned that.
I think just the way he talked about things, the perspective that he had on his life after leaving.
Yeah. There's this one thing he said where he said that I think applied even beyond Colts, where he said that a part of religious trauma syndrome, and I think it's so much, is that you feel like you're alone. And that message, he said, that you're not alone and that there are other people out there, and that when you go through it, there are other people who are going to need you. I think it applies to so much.
Well, and maybe because it was about religion that it interested me so much, because I didn't grow up religious at all. Like, we were very spiritual, but so when people talk about religions, and I just find it so fascinating. And I'm going to circle back to what other people I talked about too. Back to Jason Ritchie. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about Santa May Be a Criminal is that it made Christmas fun for me again. As an adult, I'm used to being Santa. You know, I get to buy all the gifts and do all the not so much fun Christmas stuff, that this was a whole new take on Christmas, and it made it exciting for me again. And like, Santa's just running around drinking and flying.
And by the way, anyone who listens to this episode who doesn't know who he is going to think his name is Jason Ritchie. And for those of you who haven't listened to Santa May Be Criminal, I'm not giving you the answer here. You need to go listen to Santa May Be Criminal and you'll figure it out.
And so for years, I'm like, yeah, Christmas is cool, whatever. It's super cool to like see my kids get stuff, but it was just another holiday. But now I'm like, Santa is really cool and Christmas is really fun. So I just wanted to tell you that. And then going back to what Kathy had said about her divorce, I also went through a really traumatic breakup. The whole after effects of it was awful. But I'm so thankful for it. And I'm so thankful that it happened, and my perspective on life after it happened, it changed, but it changed for the better. The loss of that relationship gave me so much more freedom. And that's how I found all of you, because I had so much time and I was just going through it. So I'm like, I'm just going to listen to all these podcasts. And I did. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I had been in that relationship.
Yeah.
When I lost my dog a few months ago, it was the most traumatic, awful, grief-stricken time I've ever been through. And there's some people who will be like, it's just a dog, but he was my best friend for 14 years. And I don't think I would have been able to grieve for him how I needed to if I had been in that relationship. I wouldn't have had the like freedom to express my grief. So I'm really thankful for that.
That's so powerful.
Oh, and then also, I don't think my son, my youngest son, would be able to be who he is if I went through that loss of my relationship. So I don't even like calling it a loss. I gained so much by getting rid of that relationship.
It was a gift.
It was. It really, really was. So that also, I think, brings it back to my most meaningful things this year is being able to have all this freedom that I have to do the things that I really want to do, and also that I was able to meet everyone that I have met.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. All right, Sophie. I love you.
I love you
You're
too.
awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to mute this and shut off my camera and go get my kid.
All right.
Day,
So
Sophie.
And I'm
who
sorry I
wants?
can't listen to the rest of you guys, and I would love to, but I
Oh,
will.
well, you'll hear it soon.
Yes,
Download it.
yes.
Download it. Download
I
wherever you
will.
subscribe. Rate it 5
Yeah.
stars. All that stuff.
And maybe you guys will still be here when I get back.
Yeah. Who knows?
Awesome.
Who knows?
Very
But if you
awesome.
give a 5-star review, we might answer your question.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, who wants to go next? Just know that whoever goes after them has to close. I've got 2 left, right? Kathy and Carly, or is it just Carly? So, Kathy raises the hand. Yeah. It was in the fall, right before I made my trip. Right before I made my trip, I think. Early October. Early October. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's often maligned, but it's I like to say, like, and Bob, wherever you are, don't let this go to your ego, but they are the wall between us and not having our rights. Yeah. Kathy, I've never told you this, but Brandon and I were going to do an episode, and we had thought of different, or I had thought of different avenues, but one of the ideas was really focusing on that cost of telling other people's stories, but it was actually a conversation you and I had on Facebook that really solidified for me the pain, the discomfort, the cost that people pay. And that ended up sort of like pushing us toward, or not pushing us toward, pushing me toward asking more about that. So, all right, Carly,
Save the
you're
best
the
for last.
closer. Right? Yes, the best for last. So, favorite episodes and meaningful things. Mhm. Mm. Are you talking about when everybody for the meetup in Atlanta? Yeah, I remember you. I don't know if it was right before you left, but very close. You were like, "This is the best day of my life," and I was like, "This is a pretty good day."
It was.
Mhm. Oh, that's awesome.
I thought
That
sausage
excellent.
was
Yeah, awesome, 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 awesome close. Jason's making a reference to a crazy trip
inside
to
joke.
Office
Yes.
Max, but the
Not a sponsor. Hashtag not a
right,
sponsor.
yes, absolutely. No, although if Topo Chico wants to be a sponsor, um, but one of the things, I mean, it's really interesting. Like you were talking, Kathy, about growing and learning, and many of the people up front were talking about like healing and finding community and all those other things. And I told you guys I wouldn't have expected any of this. Um, it really wasn't my goal, and I'm not sure what my goal was, but like those are all the things that I get out of the podcast, and the conversations with the guests are powerful because I learn things in the moment every time about myself, about other people, and that's what, like, I think authenticity and picking good guests and being willing to share about yourself can bring, but it pales in comparison to what I learn from my listeners and my relationships with them. And so I just want to say, like, when I say these are real friendships, that's not like a throwaway line or something that I'm supposed to say. These are real, um, deep friendships. And I agree with Carly. One of the best days of the year for me was spending time with you guys in Atlanta. And some of the best conversations I've had this year have been with my listeners as well as my guests. And I'm hoping for many more guest suggestions from you guys. And I'm hoping that you have a new year of joy and happiness. But if you don't, and it is sadness, you can bring that too, because like we've been talking about, life is about joy and it is about suffering. And I just want to be able to meet you and the listeners wherever you're at authentically. And like Jen was saying, giving people permission to feel however they feel in whatever moment. So anyway, people, we're good. See you next year. Thank you, everyone. Before Christmas.